Hello. I'm reacting to Darth Vader stopped. Like, what if Darth Vader stopped Tarkin from destroying Alderaan? Hang on. No. Oh my god. Finally. Damn. Yeah, it is. What if Darth Vader stopped Tarkin from destroying Alderaan or Alderaan? It's a mess because I think, yeah, in Star Wars Rebels, everyone kept calling it Alderaan. And in the movie, Alderaan, but you get the idea. Let's just say Darth Vader stopped Tarkin from destroying Leia's home. Let's go with that. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And again, I'm going to be doing a bunch more reaction videos or more on the way. Anyway, I'll have PPSW's channel in the description as always. And let's see what happens if Darth Vader stops Tarkin from destroying the planet. Especially, I think in the comments that Palpatine was upset about that. So let's see what happens.
Our story begins inside the control room for the Death Star. Grand Moff Tarkin pointed fiercely at Princess Leia, telling her that they would make an example of her home world of Alderaan. She pleaded that he stop. Their world was peaceful. They had no weapons of mass destruction on the planet or in the system. Tarkin went back around telling her that he was getting tired of this bickering. She needed to name a military target or she would see her homeworld destroyed. Leia let out under her breath the name of a former Alliance base.
Oh, don't forget, this is also the same planet that Vader, well, back then his name was Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker, and his Padawan Ahsoka Tano helped feed the planet, helped save the rebels on that planet from the Separatists during the Clone Wars. So yeah.
On Dantooine. Tarkin grinned, looking to very target or she would see her homeworld destroyed. Leia let out under her breath the name of a former Alliance base on Dantooine. Tarkin grinned, looking to Vader and telling him that she could be reasoned with. He turned back and told the deck officers to ready the weapon. Leia cried out, telling him to stop, and Vader's hand landed on her shoulder, silencing her as he pulled her back and directed her towards two Imperial troopers on deck. Vader stepped forward and told Tarkin that this wasn't the right idea, and Tarkin looked back with a disgusted scowl. He asked for answers, and Vader got up in Tarkin's face telling him that the Emperor would make an example out of them for targeting a core system, especially one as important as Alderaan. It didn't matter if the Imperial Senate was no longer around. What mattered was the fact that the rebels would gain support from the core, and that could not be allowed. Tarkin looked back to the ground and then back over to the deck officers who waited for the proper instructions on what to do. Tarkin told Vader that Alderaan was infested in rebel leaders. Destroying it would send a message to the heart of the rebellion, especially after the loss of their fleet at Scarif. This wouldn't just be a crushing blow to their leadership, now that the Senate was dissolved, but a show of imperial power. Everything went back to Tarkin's own doctrine of power. It had been established because he wanted to prove himself as the individual to bring balance and harmony to their empire. He took a distasteful look over at Vader and told him that the loss of Lothal only a month back could be corrected here. If the Alliance wanted a tarnished Outer Rim territory planet, then that was their battle, but the core would not be touched by such delinquency. Vader raised his hand and pointed at Tarkin, stepping forward and forcing his power and presence over the Imperial Moff, telling him that he was ordering him to stop. If the Emperor sided with them, then so be it, but they would not be destroying Alderaan, and that was final. Tarkin turned to the deckhands and told them to cease operations. They would destroy the planet another day. In the meantime, Tarkin turned back, calling him Lord Vader in a mocking tone, and telling him his new orders. He would send a detachment to Dantooine to scout out the legitimacy of the rebel presence there, and then Vader would take the lovely princess to her execution chambers. The Dark Lord didn't like being ordered around, but he didn't really have any choice. He won his battle regarding Alderaan. That was more than enough for the time being. What followed was Tarkin trying to use this interruption as ammo against Vader. Palpatine was contacted and the Emperor told Tarkin to send his apprentice to Coruscant. This was something the Grand Moff saw with pride, because he believed that Vader was being brought back to his master for punishment. On the other side of this conversation was Palpatine instructing Tarkin to remain at ease. There was no need to destroy Alderaan yet. He informed his good friend that they'd make sure that this was accomplished in the coming days. Palpatine was playing the part. Realistically, he was pissed off, and he immediately contacted Moff Gideon and brought him to Coruscant with Vader. When both Imperials arrived at the system, Palpatine was grumbling to himself. He was so annoyed with the actions of Moff Tarkin. He informed Gideon that he'd be taking over control of the Death Star effective immediately. Vader was praised by his master, who told him that his actions and motivations were completely validated. The fact that Tarkin almost destroyed Alderaan forced Palpatine to completely distrust his longtime ally. This, as Vader previously mentioned, nearly crippled Imperial support. As Sidious told his two allies, who were with him at the moment, he took life for purpose. In his mind, there wasn't ever an unnecessary death in his grand scheme. The contingency orders for his own death were all necessary. Punishment could be accomplished in myriad forms, so in his mind, Operation Cinder was the perfect way to punish the core and Imperial loyalist worlds after his death. But right now, this technological terror that they constructed was meant to serve as a station of power. Its look was more than its actual power. Palpatine wanted it because its usefulness didn't come from destroying planets. It came from the impact it left on people by simply existing. He continued explaining his plan to Gideon and Vader. The purpose of this station was to send a message to the rebellion. If they thought they could counter the Empire, then this was proof it would be impossible for them to win. Destroying Alderaan would be sounding the horn of revolution for the core, because the core was not responsible for these terrorists. Alderaan's leaders could have been made into public examples, but that was now out of the question. They couldn't put the Death Star over Alderaan and then execute those leaders. It would look improper. In Palpatine's mind, it would make it look like the Empire subjugated a planet and then killed its leaders for panicking. This in of itself would seem as if the Empire had panicked after making a mistake.
Yeah, and that would be a downfall. Yeah, that would be a downfall. So yeah. There is 5 more rebels coming to attack the Empire. And we don't want that. We don't want no more rebels. We want more Imperials.
That could not happen. Vader was instructed to go to Alderaan and address the people with the Queen. From there, they could earn public trust back. Gideon was instructed to go to the Death Star and take command. They would bring Tarkin back to Coruscant and rampart him. Both Imperials understood what this meant. It was a term used by upper-class and higher-ranked Imperial officers, and those close to Palpatine. To rampart someone was to publicly pin an accident or comeuppance on an unsuspecting Imperial officer that had or hadn't made a mistake. They were going to do that to Krennic, but Palpatine knew Orson wasn't as dull to make a move like this against Alderaan. He should have given command of Stardust to Krennic. He actually cared about the Death Star's image more than Tarkin ever could. Mistakes with temporary setbacks. He turned to the two flanking him and dispatched them. Outside of Alderaan, inside of a Corellian Corvette, not named the tank.
Yeah. I'll be like, what if Moff Gideon, Grand Moff Gideon, or Moff Gideon from the Mandalorian, the Mandalorian was in control of Death Star instead of Moff Tarkin, Grand Moff Tarkin. I want to see that. Like, what if he was in control of Death Star instead of him?
4, Bail Organa, Luke Skywalker, and Ben Kenobi made their way for Yavin 4. Bail Organa, as any true leader would, was calming her people, but she was the one that sent Bail to Yavin. She knew how important it was to get there and reinforce the rebels with the Death Star plans. The rebels needed Bail and Mon, while Alderaan needed their queen. She would stay here and face down the Empire. When Ben and Luke arrived inside the Millennium Falcon, there was a mass panic on the planet. The arrival of the Death Star disrupted gravity on the planet itself. Oceans that were
Great.
dormant started spitting out tsunami-sized waves. Luckily for the people of Alderaan, coastal cities were built near large walls from the sea, so people at the beach were the only ones really affected by the appearance of the Death Star. Apparently in
great.
Alderaan's past there had been a moon or something, but it continued to shrink down and eventually turned into an asteroid and collapsed a mountain range. The coastal cities were built long before that when the oceans were more vibrant. Regardless, Han and Chewie dropped off their targets and bailed, not wanting anything to do with the chaos. Bail Organa knew that Ben and Luke would be useful for their war against the Empire, so he wanted them at Yavin. It was agreed and they left. No one knew where Leia was, and Bail didn't believe she was inside the Death Star. When the Corellian Corvette jumped to hyperspace, Ben thought he felt a whisper in the Force, but he wasn't really sure. The Empire itself reacted. Vader arrived on the surface of the planet with an Imperial escort. He wasn't known for making public appearances, and he arrived with force. He disclosed the failure of Grand Moff Tarkin, expressing that he had made a terrible mistake. Vader reinforced the fact that the Emperor was committed to making a stronger, more unified empire for the people. The station above the planet was a communication relay, and it was supposed to be going to the Outer Rim. The initial plan was to use it as a military base, to wipe out the rebels. Once the rebels were dealt with, it'd be turned into a long-range communication outpost for intergalactic travel and exploration. Vader told the people that Tarkin would pay for his lack of care to the situation. He then revealed that the Empire would be hosting a celebration on Alderaan to make up for it. He turned to the Queen and publicly apologized on behalf of the Emperor. There were of course questions for what happened to Palpatine and why he wasn't showing himself. But a couple hours after Vader's speech, which Darth absolutely hated doing, Palpatine made his own appearance. Sidious walked out flanked by royal guards as he told the galaxy that Tarkin had betrayed their trust. As a Grand Moff and as a leader, he failed to uphold the standard of imperial life. They were going to correct this fallacy and make amends with the people of the Empire. Palpatine reiterated some talking points made by Vader, and then they had Tarkin publicly flogged for his crimes, which was rough to see, being that he was freaking old. And then a couple Death Troopers emerged from the shadows and dragged a limp Tarkin away to execution, that is. Palpatine and Vader very quickly put an end to the fear that the citizens of the galaxy would have had in their leadership. Later on, there was a planned meeting and interview with Moff Gideon, the current operator of Max Aramis, the name that was given to the Death Star to be publicly recognized as. On Yavin, the rebels were loading up for an attack. They saw two operator of Max Aramis that the citizens of the galaxy would have had in their leadership. Later on, there was a planned meeting and interview with Moff Gideon, the current operator of Max Aramis, the name that was given to the Death Star to be
Okay, that was gonna be the actual name, I think, for the Death Star. Alright. I think I like the Death Star, name Death Star better than that.
publicly recognized as. On Yavin, the rebels were loading up for an attack. They saw two interviews, but this exercise had been done before. The Empire had made promises and didn't keep them. For rebel forces, they saw this as yet another lie. The irony is, they were actually telling the truth. The Empire had no reason to actually destroy Alderaan because it was core territory. They covered their backs with press conferences and Moff Gideon's interview that would complete that cycle. It was part of the reason that Palpatine selected Gideon to begin with. He was a very eloquent and knowledgeable speaker, and he'd be able to communicate the mistake to the people of the galaxy. The rebels prepared their forces, and thanks to Bail Organa, they were operating with more than just a couple squadrons. With the extra time, due to the Empire never finding Yavin and Alderaan never being destroyed, Alliance High Command was able to scrounge up forces for an attack at the Death Star. Their assault would come immediately after they disclosed the Death Star plans to.
I see this being like the downfall of the rebels. It's like they ironically they do keep their word, and then the rebels come in guns a blazing, attacking the Empire for no reason. They didn't destroy the planet. They had a party. They dealt with the situation, and everything is fine. And Palpatine and Vader eased the people and made it like, and they calmed the people down. And then you got these rebel scum coming in to like attack the Empire for what? This will make the rebels look like the bad guys.
Everyone who would be participating. Among the Alliance freedom fighters were Hera Syndulla, Omega, and Luke. Their assault would also include a variety of rebel fighter craft, including A-Wings and a couple B-Wings that were not currently on Yavin. It was the remnants of the Battle of Scarif coming to Alderaan's aid. They had seen the power of this weapon at Jeddah and Scarif, and now billions of lives were in danger. They poured into the trenches of the super weapon after exiting from hyperspace. John Vander, Garvin Drees, and General Syndulla issued out orders. The only reason Hera wasn't leading the entire assault was because she wasn't coming from Yavin and wasn't present for the initial debriefing. The rebels poured into battle. Luke flew close to his squad mates as Wedge kept TIE pilots off of them. As their assault began, Moff Gideon was in the middle of his interview. It was a sit-down inside the control center, so Alderaan could be seen in the background. He was smiling with a smug look as he told the people of the galaxy about the great usefulness of the space station they sat in. He promised that once the age of exploration was over, Naxxramas would be used as a civilian transport. They would use it as a refugee camp, somewhere where people could come from around the galaxy to be in. The irony is, he actually wasn't lying. Palpatine, by the time of the age of exploration came to an end, would have figured out immortality. There would be at least one or two other Death Stars, including the second one and Starkiller Base, so there really wouldn't be a militaristic need for something like this current station, which by that point would be pretty much rendered useless. Getting shot up as he told the interviewers that they had to go. The space station was under attack. The Moff used a calm and demanding tone as the interviewer asked who it was, and Gideon looked back sincerely, telling the people of the galaxy that they were the insurgents, but they referred to themselves as an alliance. He pointed the camera at Alderaan and told everyone watching that this was what they jeopardized. They were attacking the Empire's way of life, and it couldn't be allowed to continue. Gideon shoved the camera crew out and quickly spoke to his command crew. They were going to quickly go out into action. Ace pilots were deployed. Because Gideon didn't have a sense of overconfidence with the space station, he released thousands of TIE fighters to counter the rebellion. They were stuck, and he would wipe them out here, finishing off what Tarkin couldn't at Scarif. On the surface of
Oh nice, like send out Vader, and then 1 and 2 TIE fighters like here, and you got Vader in the middle. No, send out hundreds of TIEs, okay. Send out everything we have at those rebel scum. Send everything we have at them.
Alderaan, Lord Vader moved towards his shuttle, telling the pilot to return him to a Star Destroyer. From there, he could aid the troopers defending the Death Star. They quickly escorted the Dark Lord to the Devastator. Inside the trenches of the Death Star, Obi-Wan spoke over communication frequencies, telling Luke to trust the Force. Hera realized that whoever was inside of Red 5 was incredibly important. She contacted Omega, who was in an adjacent vessel, telling her to keep forward with Vander and Drees. She would pull back around and cut off the ties following them. Luke slid from side to side inside the trenches, as dozens of TIE fighters tried to trail him into the tunnel, but they couldn't. Syndulla's masterful piloting cut them off from their pursuit. The first wing of torpedoes missed their target, and the next squad was up. Luke followed closely, listening to Ben as he pressed forward. A couple TIEs sprung in from above the other X-Wings in front of him. His friend Biggs was blown out of the sky, crashing into the trench, as Luke whipped his fighter from side to side and thrusted a control lever forward. He flew closer to the wall, gliding against it as R2 whirred behind his head. Luke spun back, spinning just like his father would have, and regaining control. He was the last shot at winning this battle. Omega was coming back around with Vander to provide covering fire for Luke. The Ghost was still above, trying to distract as best as it could, with Hera calling to Luke telling him to do what Obi-Wan said. He listened. The targeting computer slipped into the control system, and he focused on the Force. It was so new, so untapped, and yet he grasped the trigger and pressed down, releasing twin torpedoes that disappeared from sight, as the 1 in a million shot was completed by the first-time Force user. Luke took a deep breath, feeling the weight so present on his shoulders dissipate as he pulled back and joined the survivors in their desperate escape. The TIEs trailed them, but they had to evacuate. Moff Gideon stood on the bridge, and his ace pilot informed him that they had scared the rebels off. He grinned, turning to the camera crew and telling them to get their cameras back on. They did immediately, and he told the people, those still waiting on the broadcast to kick back on, that they had derailed. He was cut off by a static buzz, signifying the connection had been completely cut off. The Empire watched in real time Mox Aramis blow up. From Alderaan, reports came in as pieces of debris started to descend onto cities, mountains, and oceans. The following days would be chaotic, not just for the Empire, and especially Alderaan, but the entire galaxy. The rebels were safe on Yavin, but their actions had them regarded as devils. Luke Skywalker was referred to as an infamous terrorist, alongside the names of some other key pilots that the Empire was able to expose, such as Wedge Antilles and Harrison Dula. The rebels celebrated early on, but their celebrations were silenced following the revelation of what they had lost. One of the cities on Alderaan was clipped by a piece of falling debris, and it killed a couple thousand lives. Palpatine and Vader were utilizing this as a chance to expose the rebels for what they really were, and the rebels couldn't do anything. Alliance members already worried before Scarif were pushed away from having any desire to continue participating in the Alliance. They hadn't failed, but they just made their fight nearly impossible, and all their jubilee was silenced. So strategies were put in place by both sides. Luckily for Palpatine, without the Senate, he was able to rally support around him. People were afraid of the Alliance now. They saw how large the Death Star was, and the fact that a couple rebels could destroy it proved how dangerous they were. Some other people called the Empire weak for this, and there were individuals that spoke illy about the attack on Alderaan. If the Death Star could be a moon-sized space station, then how could it be destroyed by a single X-Wing fighter craft? That part didn't make sense to some citizens, and it called into question Imperial strength. But that was ironically what Palpatine wanted. Now more credits, more than ever before, could be funneled into the Imperial military. Inside Rebel Base, while both sides were trying to come up with their own individual counters, Ben was beginning his instruction of the Force to Luke. Bail was desperate to find Leia, and he hoped that she was still alive somewhere. Rey was able to publicly call for...
Oh yeah, she was on the Death Star. Either she was on the Death Star and it blew up, or she found an escape pod and she left before it exploded. But yeah, she was still on the Death Star and it blew.
help of the Empire to find her daughter, but the Empire silenced those comments. Lieutenant Commander Enric Pride was sent to deal with this. He was a Palpatine loyalist, and also someone that Palpatine believed could handle everything. Being that he was well aware of Leia's death inside the Death Star, before explosion, Palpatine would make sure Pride framed everything to be a rebel plot. They couldn't afford to make Queen Organa out to be the bad guy here. Instead, they'd play the card of the Imperial Loyalist Queen, whose daughter was seduced and abducted by the rancid rebel insurgents. It would appeal to core citizens, and it would give them rationale to be worried about their own children. However, despite the way that things were going for the Alliance, the war only dragged out for months. Bail was able to go to and from Alderaan, but never did. Rey was being watched every second of the day, which forced husband and wife to be separated indefinitely. Luke was learning the Force and training to become a Jedi with Master Kenobi. The war itself between the Rebels and Empire turned into a dull grudge match. There weren't even large-scale battles, which there hadn't really been beforehand up until Scarif and Lothal. But now, there was this weird precedent for Imperial citizens to contribute to the war effort. Without Saw Gerrera around, the Rebel forces under Alliance command couldn't do anything about it. As the months went on, the search for Leia became more hopeless. Ben, Luke, and Hera had gone on missions to find her, but they always came up on the short end. Hera was able to convince Sabine to leave Lothal and come to Yavin, so that she could help Ben with training Luke. Her skills with the Darksaber and the lightsaber given to her by Ezra would be useful for Luke's training. Sabine was Sabine about it, but she eventually came around. Alliance forces, on the other hand, were in need of a desperate change, but it never came. Lieutenant Commander Pride had, in the months since Alderaan, earned favorability with the Emperor, and so he was assigned to the project over Endor. While Pride couldn't do much with it now, he was able to stand as acting general over the facility as it grew. Vader, on the other hand, especially with Luke's image being plastered across the Empire, found it hard to concentrate. Sidious could sense this, so in an effort to keep his apprentice grounded, he sent Marok, one of the few surviving Inquisitors, out to assist him in finding Luke. This was propositioned as Vader's potential replacement, even though Marok would never fill such shoes. Just a light-hearted threat. With Sith on the hunt for Skywalker, Ben kept Luke safe on Yavin. This didn't stop Luke's quest for adventure. but at the moment there was no adventure to be had. The rebellion, in lieu of the rise of imperial patriotism, decided to target small, exterior, and frontier planets. Among the planets targeted was Caladan, under the jurisdiction of Morgan Elsbeth. Luke and Sabine would run a joint mission against her, and in using their Jedi weapons, a Jedi and Mandalorian would fend off a witch in a duel within the compound the Magistrate controlled. Ben could have got involved, but he also decided against it. His time for fighting was over. He instead helped ferry people away from the fight and fended off the Magistrate's droids. Luke and Sabine teamed up, and for the Mandalorian, it felt like being with her brother all over again. She missed Ezra dearly, and so many attributes about Luke reminded her of Ezra.
This is the Honda Prologue. We can go anywhere we want.
In this duel, Luke took the traditional Jedi approach to the fight, which was far more traditional than Ezra would have ever gone. She, on the other hand, used her jetpack, grapples, and blasters to counter the Magistrate. Morgan Elsbeth was a longtime Imperial ally, and her death, coming at the hands of an Emerald Blade, would signify the freedom of Caladan. The Alliance realized that to win this war with the Empire, they needed these small victories. The colony on the planet didn't really have a large population, which was obviously a small problem, but the rebels needed to spread their message. They had to light their spark. It just continued to be apparent that such a spark wasn't really desired by much of the galaxy, not after Alderaan at least. These miniature losses for the Empire weren't important enough to make it to Palpatine's desk, but they were important enough to draw the attention of Merrick. He had been released from Vader's side to hunt down these Jedi. It was under Vader's belief that if Merrick could find the trail, then he could lead Vader to his son. Initially, this hunt started with going to already hit planets by the Jedi, but after about 2 years of finding nothing, Merrick changed his strategy and went to a planet not yet hit, and he ran a distraction. Thanks to training from Obi-Wan, when Luke and Sabine arrived, they were able to free the people from Imperial presence. That lasted for a good couple of minutes until Merrick showed up and attacked them. Sabine was familiar with the Inquisitors due to her time with them before Ezra's disappearance. She and Luke moved in, side by side, and attacking the Inquisitor, who had by this point alerted his master to this presence. Merrick, while still serving Sidious, reported to Vader first and even saw him as a master of swords, even though that wasn't shared the other way around. Ben continued moving people away from the conflict as he always did. Old Obi-Wan Kenobi was like a beacon. He would lead people away from these skirmishes. Inside the town, rebel commanders were taking down Imperial stormtroopers, while a duel took place in the middle of the city. Merrick was not nearly as skilled as Elsbeth, but his survivability was something that allowed him to avoid death. He was much more cautious than the Dathomiri Witch was, mostly because he was stalling until Vader arrived. Due to the Dark Lord's fleets operating out in the frontier of the galaxy, because of these rebel attacks, he arrived before the duel ever came to an end. He deployed his shuttle, and Obi-Wan, who was moving his people away from the combat, suddenly turned back. Vader was so focused on finding Luke that he didn't even clock the presence of his old master, having assumed that by this point he was dead. Obi-Wan, as quickly as he could, ran back to the square to save Luke and Sabine. Vader marched through the city streets, and when he turned the corner, he watched Sabine use her jetpack to distract Merrick, just enough for him to slip up and get sliced into pieces, releasing screams from the magic used to create him. Vader's lightsaber ignited and the two Jedi turned towards him. He saw his lightsaber in the hands of Luke and realized that it was truly his son. Their duel began regardless of that. Sabine hadn't been training with Luke the entire time, but she listened to what Ben said. They moved in together, same as they had against Merrick and Elsbeth. Vader bashed his lightsaber at them. Sabine had seen this raw power from Vader before, and she wasn't about to let her best friend get hurt by this monster. The Dark Lord towered over both of his opponents and parried at every chance he got. Their duel was slow and methodical. Luke and Sabine were working with bare-bone instructions, and Vader was well experienced. As he batted each of his young opponents away, he singled out Luke, trying to find a way to bring him the truth. Luke did, but didn't really know. He had pieced everything together by this point thanks to stories told by Ben, but he still defended himself from Vader's vicious strikes. Their blades parried once more, and Sabine shot a grapple into the side of Vader's mask. He reacted violently, throwing Luke to the ground and gripping the line and yanking it towards him. Sabine flew forward with it, and right as he was about to strike her, his lightsaber was flung from his hand. It slipped and clapped against the ground, and when Vader saw the feat, he felt who it was before even looking up to confirm it. He threw Sabine to the ground similar to how he did Luke, and told Ben that he should have never come back. Ben ignited his lightsaber and told Darth that he was the one who shouldn't have come. In the background, they could hear Imperial troopers routing from combat. Kenobi told Vader that Luke knew the truth he had seemingly come here to tell him. Luke looked past his father and realized that everything he believed was true was real. Vader pulled his lightsaber with the Force and ignited it. He stormed forward and Kenobi asked what happened to the girl. The Dark Lord didn't process it, as he swung violently at the Jedi Master who had become so old. Kenobi ducked out of the way and parried another strike. He slowly pushed Vader's blade away. Darth turned back and asked if he meant the Princess of Alderaan, and Kenobi nodded his head. Vader slashed forward as Kenobi slid away, knowing that at his age tanking a hit from Vader would do a number on his body. Darth turned back and told Obi-Wan that he killed her himself, with his very lightsaber. As Vader was about to swing, he saw a noticeable shock on Obi-Wan's face. This wasn't just out of hurt for himself, but hurt for another. Ben stepped back and told Vader that he was truly lost, having killed his own daughter. Vader's lightsaber was in mid-swing when the words came out of Obi-Wan's mouth, and the blade darted across the ground, having slipped from his hand again. He looked over to Obi-Wan, who told him that Luke and Leia were his twins, and he killed off half of what Padme left behind in a galaxy he created for the Sith. In a similar manner to how he cried out after he learned of Padme's death, Vader stepped forward and slammed down onto his knees and let out an echoing no that bounced around the corners of buildings and the city square itself. Sabine raised her lightsaber and Obi-Wan raised his hand, in a manner to tell her to stop. Luke, having known the truth about his sister, asked Vader why he could do it. There was silence. Nothing but the breathing apparatus could be heard. Ben slowly moved away from his fallen student and got to Sabine and Luke's sides to make sure they were alright. Vader turned to face Ben and asked if it was really true. In a similar tone to their previous duel, Obi-Wan told him that he was sorry for all of it, but those were his actions and his choices, not Ben's. Ben never alluded to the idea of a retribution or even a return to the light. Luke, on the other hand, looked from his current father figure to his actual father and told him that he hadn't told Obi-Wan or Yoda this, but he believed that the man across from him was still Anakin Skywalker, his father. Maybe there wasn't an interaction between father and son yet, but Luke had heard stories from Ben and Ahsoka. Luke didn't believe it was at all possible for any one person to become that evil. Luke tossed his father a communication device and told him coordinates. If he wanted to earn his son and maybe his best friend and former student back, they could try and start fresh. Vader looked at the dirt, and when his eyes drifted back up, Sabine had her hand under Luke's arm and tugged him away, as the trio returned to their allies and abandoned the world. A week after, Luke and Vader would meet on Ryloth, and their relationship would begin fresh. There were many obstacles to get over, and they would, but for the next 3 years, they would establish their bond. In this time, the Alliance continued to struggle, but their fleet grew exponentially. The Empire's second Death Star was finishing up completion under Allegiant General Pride, who had proposed a great trap to his Emperor, one that would be implemented. The Jedi consisted of Ben, Luke, Sabine, Ahsoka, and a returned Darth Vader, one who had new armor with lighter robes and donned a blue lightsaber, his old one. His face was showing and it was covered in wrinkles. He had yet to grow his hair back, but that was something that he could live with. They had a nice little happy family together, but no one in the Alliance, aside from Hera and Bail, knew about this. Anakin did what he could to try and assist the rise of the rebellion, but so much had changed in the years since he had left the Empire. What General Pride suggested was a trap. There was a construction pit that the Empire was going to cover up. Being that the first Death Star was destroyed by a small hole, why not give the Alliance another shot? A plan was set for Endor, and the Emperor agreed to be present. The Alliance was intentionally leaked information and they made their move for the planet. They had amassed an amazing fleet in the 5 years since Alderaan. Even without galactic support, their small-time work in the frontier planets helped them earn some favorability. The Mon Cala were really the biggest reason this fleet existed. Without them, this assault wouldn't be possible. Regardless, the Alliance sent a strike force led by Captain Rex to the surface. Luke and Anakin would get themselves inside the superstructure, and everything else would go as planned. A commander raid on the surface would transpire with Ewok help. The rebels would engage with the Empire over the Death Star under the leadership of Akbar and Syndulla. Inside the station, Luke and Anakin would find Sidious and begin their fight with him. Ben was on Yavin, and he was seated inside of a meditation. Sabine was with Hera and fighting inside the Ghost. Luke was with Anakin and fighting inside the station. Everything felt right within the Force. Sidious, for the first time in a long time, drew his lightsabers, because he wanted the pleasure of killing Vader himself. Plus, Vader's new friend, Sabine, plated some of his armor in Beskar, which would be really pretty useful against Palpatine's blades. Luke kept pace, using all of Anakin's, Ben's, and Yoda's before he died, training to fend off Sidious's mastery. On the surface, mimicking their struggle in space.
Yeah, like, what if Palpatine made Darth Vader shoot out of Beskar? That'd be nice. You have like this, the most terrifying Sith Lord, and on top of it, his armor is made out of Beskar, something that a lightsaber can't pierce. That'd be nice.
Rex's commandos made a push for the shield generator and laid their explosives before detonating it. The explosion of the generator allowed rebel fighters in the fight over Endor to make a move for the reactor shaft. General Pryde waited patiently for this moment. Due to the second Death Star being completely finished, aside from one entrance towards the core, Pryde was prepared. General Syndulla continued fending off the fleet as Commander Vander led fighters across the construction shaft.
Also, this Death Star is like, what? 99% done? Not just like with the laser part, but I mean like the exterior, like how we seen in episode 4. In episode 4, we see the Death Star fully built. But that's what it is now. This will be a day long remembered for the Empire.
The closer they got, the closer it felt to victory. A Legion General Pryde told the deckhand to open fire, and the first explosion was sent towards the surface of the planet, destroying the entire Imperial and Rebel force on the face of Endor. It was only a single reactor ignition, so Endor would slowly turn into Jedha. Ben felt Rex's death almost immediately, as he was jolted from his meditation, looking over to Ahsoka, who was next to him. Her eyes watered as she felt the same thing. But there was also something else. The word sat on the tip of her tongue, and it was panic. Admiral Versio, whose daughter had just died in the destruction of Endor's surface, rolled his daughter's Raider II class corvette out of the reactor shaft. Versio's flagship, the Eviscerator, was in the middle of combat with the Rebel fleet that was currently opening fire. The rebels who were once safe no longer could hide within the Imperial fleet. Broadsides ravaged the hulls of both Star Destroyers and Mon Calamari cruisers. The Corvus, under Admiral Versio's control, blocked the path of the rebels trying to enter, and as they tried to take evasive action, surface cannons on the Death Star opened up and shredded the fighters. Anyone who didn't pull up slammed into the hull of the Corvette. Tragically for Admiral Versio, this meant that with the combined accidental kamikazes and torpedoes slapping his hull, he would die in the explosion of the Corvus, never seeing the result of Endor. But the wreck...
There's a price to pay, but the Empire will rise again. A small price to pay, but yeah, it's only a small price.
The wreckage of the hull would only continue to block the tunnel. So even though the Corvus was destroyed, the rebels couldn't actually get into the station. Inside the control room, General Pryde, who didn't have to react to Palpatine's orders, ordered the destruction of Hull 1, and it came with a single reactor ignition, detonating the capital ship of the rebellion. Its debris would damage Imperial and Rebel ships, but that was fine. Pryde then ordered Piet to finish off the rest of Alliance forces inside the Executor. The throne room battle was going much differently. Anakin and Luke, who was now donning his green lightsaber, attacked Palpatine. He was remarkably quick, even at his old age, and he refused to allow the two Jedi to beat him. From beside him, Luke could see the Rebel fleet crumbling, and his distraction left him open. Sidious saw the chance and went for the kill. As Sidious drove his blade forward, his almost lethal drive was directed into Luke's thigh, where he looked down and saw a red lightsaber sticking out of him. Sidious, who was using two lightsabers, had gotten one strike and another kill. He knew Vader would try and defend his son, like any good Jedi. And so, his left arm crossed under his right jab, and Vader's chest was filled with a red lightsaber. As Sidious took pride in his victory, Anakin's blue lightsaber ignited into Palpatine's back, driving up through his chest and out of his neck. The ignition was instant and it took his life. Anakin fell to his knees and Luke would be by his side. His father thanked him for his forgiveness. The past 3 years had been the best part of his life, and all he could do was wish that it could have lasted forever. But that wasn't the case, and Anakin told his son to find his peace. It wasn't worth suffering over the past. Luke's father died in his arms, and he was forced to flee. He would take Anakin's lightsaber for remembering his father and limp to his vessel. By the time he exited, General Pride and Admiral Piet had won the battle. The rebellion was completely destroyed. Their fleet was nothing more than a couple corvettes, smaller than anything the Alliance had before the Battle of Atalan, and it was over.
Right.
The rebellion had lost the war. Those who survived were labeled terrorists, but there was also something else. A galaxy that had felt terror for 5 years due to the rebellion, especially after Alderaan, now celebrated. There was a great sense of galactic pride, and even though Palpatine had truly died, the people were ready for the post-war era. Everything after Endor could be described as simply euphoric. They won the war, there was no need to fund the Imperial war machine, and without any true successor, the galaxy was left to funnel in their own leaders, which came in forms of governors, mayors, and a couple moffs here and there, bickering for control. What came of it was a democratic empire. There were some assassinations and stuff like that, but nothing was enough to take the Jubilee away from the people of it. The social swing in the status quo went from a people of a war-torn galaxy to one of an enlightened people who had driven away their greatest threat, terrorists. There were parties in the streets, Imperial troopers returning from active duty, and the lot of it. Enraptured people were ready for the budget to come back to them, because they had sacrificed so much in the 5 years leading up to this moment. People like General Pride can make a political move for power, but the establishment of a temporary government in Palpatine's absence left the officers of the Empire with one question: become politicians or keep killing for fun? Most chose the latter. The movement of the Empire was still evil in nature. They allowed slavery and they continued to oppress, but it slowly decreased without Palpatine. In the 5 years after Endor, survivors of the battle were still being hunted. A new Jedi Order was growing on Quen, which was outside of Hutt space at a former Jedi outpost. Most rebels fled into the unknown regions and disappeared for good, and Thrawn had returned, alongside that of Ezra Bridger. Thrawn's return would tighten up the Imperial military. Allegiant General Pride and Thrawn wouldn't get along too much, but they didn't need to. They were maintaining order in the galaxy. Pockets of rebellion would still pop up, but they would always be suppressed. The Jedi would do what they could, but they weren't really wanted around by anyone, not even their own rebels. In the decades that followed Thrawn's return, Imperial pride would continue to soar. The Jedi were more welcome than they had been since the establishment of the Empire, but that wasn't saying a whole lot. Thrawn and Pride would be labeled as heroes of the Empire for fending off a loose cannon enemy from the unknown regions. The Final Order would still rise, even without Palpatine's involvement or survival. Their return would see the destruction of Coruscant under the strike of a Zyston-class Star Destroyer. While the secondary war would be won against the Final Order, the Empire would label the Final Order War era as the Great Reset. A new government would rise, filling in the cracks of the foundation of the Democratic Empire, to make something truly special and truly unified for the people of the galaxy. Ben Kenobi would be gone by this point, but the order he helped Luke create would remain strong. It would be in the same year of the destruction of Coruscant that their order would find its place among the people of the galaxy. A galaxy that, while still controlled by the Empire, found growth in an era without the Sith. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Theldon, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexandra Reese, The Beginning and End, Django Fat Clone, Nick 5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Gallivant Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sirwell 7067, Darth Revan, Grandy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewu 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Naguin, Save the Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cowley, Young Lisa 66, Madman Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, 46 Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, many of their first names, Darksing 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord. Before supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. This is probably one of the weirdest directions I've gone with an original era video, but I kind of like this direction. The Empire still remains strong without Alderaan's destruction. There's no reason for sympathizers to flee to the rebellion, and so I wanted to extend the war a little bit past, so 5 ABY would be where this video kind of crescendos at Endor. I like the idea of having Luke still save Vader, but the Empire win. And that was one of the more challenging things for this video to accomplish, for me at least, was making it so that the Empire could win, but Vader still turned to the light. And even though he turned to the light, it still worked out in the end for the Jedi. The Jedi get their rebirth. But the real thorn for the Empire in this story seems to be Palpatine. While Palpatine's actions after Alderaan were good, it's his actions in the post-Endor era that would have contributed to the Empire kind of losing favorability and probably starting another rebellion. And so I kind of liked having this idea with Luke, Anakin, and Palpatine fighting each other in a lightsaber duel, but the Alliance itself getting crushed and curb-stomped by an efficient Allegiant general in General Pride, the general from Rise of Skywalker. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. A little bit dark, kind of neutral, probably the most neutral ending there is. But I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.
Yep. That's a lot. Now back to, what if Anakin became Senator of Tatooine? Or what if the Empire... Or what if the rebels won the Battle of Hoth? Or what if Anakin became Senator of Tatooine? Gotta do Tatooine Senator. Anakin becomes Senator first and then that one. Anyway, bye for now. Don't forget to Bye for now. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And don't forget to check out my reaction video. And again, channel will be in the description below as always. And yeah, just subscribe for more reaction videos. I'll be pumping up more reactions every day now. I'll be just, again, focusing on one thing. And maybe next week or something, or next month or so, I'll focus on something different. But right now, let's continue on with the reactions. Bye. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And I'll see you guys next time for, well, in a couple of minutes for what if Anakin became Senator of Tatooine.